Good morning from Rome. We are starting a new parak, a new volume of the Art Scroll. We are up to parak Hey, the fifth parak, Nun Beis Amud Beis 52b, all the way on the bottom, and we are continuing our discussion about Tchumen. So one of the things we have to figure out before we start, we've been talking about placing a food item or having oneself, and therefore creating shvisa, creating residency outside of your city. But the first thing we have to now define, we have to go back and ask ourselves, what is the definition of a city? Before we talk about, where how to connect two cities, how to allow yourself to go beyond your city. What is your city? What exactly is included in your city? So that's what the Mishnah is going to be dealing with. It says the Mishnah, how do we extend the boundaries of the city before we figure out the tchum? In other words, first you have to figure out where the city ends, and then you give yourself 2,000 amos. That's before you do anything, right? In other words, if you are in Baltimore or I'm in Rome, and you want to know how far you could go from your city, first you have to figure out what are the city limits, and then you go 2,000 amos beyond that. That's before you put on any, food or anything of that. That you just get naturally. So says the Mishnah, so if a house goes out and a house goes in, then we measure from the outer house. Okay, so basically what happens is that the border of the city is always going to be measured in a square or rectangle, and so even if there's one house that goes beyond, okay, has to be within a certain distance of the last house. But let's say it's close enough and a certain house goes out a little bit beyond, so we're going to measure a line from that furthest house. We're not going to care about the fact that all the other houses are a little bit closer this way. The fact that there's one house over here, we're going to measure from that house and make a square, make a line at that point, a right angle, I guess. Okay, so similarly, you have a wall and a tower is recessed, and a tower protrudes from the wall, right? So let's say one part of the wall goes out. So again, you're going to measure from that outer place. Hayusham gedudios givostar tvachim. If there are ruins that are still 10 tvachim high, extending from the cities, from the city, then you're going to measure again from the edges. Uksharm, also a bridge, unefashos, or tomb building, sheishman beis dira, either of those which have a dwelling place. So both a tomb building or a bridge, they have like a box where people are watchmen stands, and so as long as it has a dwelling place there, potential for dwelling, then we're going to measure from that space. And again, and the Mishnah says you extend the tchum measures opposite those places across the entire side of the city. So again, wherever that house or tower ends, you make a line going across, and you make the square surrounding it, even though it's the only thing that extends. You make the tchum like a square tablet, so that you gain an additional area in the corners. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel argue about the terminology or the exact text that we have in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, how do we extend? And the term me'abrin could be read chatan me'abrin with an ayin, v'chatani ma'abrin with an aleph. Okay, it means the same thing, that we extend it, but the question is it spelled with an aleph or with an ayin? What's the difference? Ma'atam ma'abrin aver. The one who says that we do with an aleph, it means limb by limb, and what that means is that if there's a house that extends, we make like a limb next to it, like kind of like my hand. So there's a house over here, put like a hand going out, extending it, extending the city, extending the borders of the city. V'chatani ma'abrin, pishu bara, and the one who says with an ayin, which is the version that we have, which is seemingly the correct version, which is the version we have, that's like a pregnant woman whose body's enlarged. In other words, we extend the city, even though not the entire city goes this far, but just like a pregnant woman whose stomach juts out, similarly, we extend the city around that bulge. Okay, Oras Machpelah. So now we have we're going to tangent over here. We have other places where Rabbi and Shmuel argue about the meaning of certain words. Okay, so Ma'aras Machpelah, the pasuk says that the cave in Hebron is called Ma'aras Machpelah, which means a double cave. Rabbi and Shmuel argue. One says that the cave consists of two rooms, one in front of the other. That's the idea of double. And the other one says that it consists of a room with an upper level on top of it. So the Gemara says, wait, if you say it's one on top of the other, that's why it's called a double cave. The one who says it's two rooms, is that really a double? In other words, all caves have rooms. They go one to another. There's nothing unique. If it's a two-story cave, that's unique, and that's what we'll call it a double cave. But otherwise, the fact that it's two rooms, one in front of the other, would that really be a reason to call it a double cave? So when it says no, you're right. It's not referring to the cave, but rather what's there. Shekfula bezugos, that there are multiples of couples that are buried there. Mamre Kiryas Arba is alluded to when it describes Hebron as a city of four. Rav Yitzchak said Kiryas Arba Zugos, the city of four couples. Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Leah. So these are four couples that are buried in that place. You see, that's why it's called double, according to that version that says it's one room inside and next one room and then leading to another room. That's not a reason enough to call it Machpelah. So the reason it's called double is because the doubles, i.e. the couples that are buried there. Okay, another pasuk that they disagree about the meaning. Another word, Vahibim Raphael. It was in the days of Amraphel. Rav Shmuel Chadam or Nimrod Shmo. One says, so it was in the days of Amraphel. One says his real name was Nimrod. V'lama nikra Shmo Amraphel. Why was he nicknamed Amraphel? Sha'amar, because from the word Amar, he said, he peel and he pushed, or he cast, La'avram Avinu Sof Kivshan Eish, and put Avram into the blazing furnace. So we know that Avram was put into this fiery furnace. It's a very famous medrash. And who was the one who judged, who decided he should be pushed there? It was Nimrod. So he was nicknamed Nimrod for the fact that he was nicknamed, Amraphel, from the word Amar, from the word he said, and appeal that he pushed. Who did he push? He pushed Avram in. So he was the one who judged and ruled that Avram should be pushed in. Other version says his real name was Amraphel. Nimrod. Why was he nicknamed Nimrod? Shimon is called Olam Kula Lav Bal Malchuso, because while he was in charge, he led the world in rebellion against Hashem. So the idea being, there's a reference to the Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Bavel, which long discussion to its own, but it seems like there is, it not seems, the Torah says that it was meant to be built to be some form of a rebellion against Hashem, and so the word Nimrod from the word Mered, which means rebellion, but his real name is Amraphel, right? So that's what we're arguing about, which is the real name, which is the nickname. But another dispute, one that is quite timely, V'yakam melech chadash Mitzrayim, a new king arose over Egypt. Okay, so this is in the beginning of Shemos. Rav Shmuel argue, Chadam or Chadash Mamish. One says when it says new, it means literally a new person. The other one says his decrees were new, but it was the same king. Madam or Chadash Mamish, one who says it's a new king, that makes sense. Chadash says new. Madam or Chadash, and why? What's pushing the one who says that it's the same king, but only that he changed his decrees? His decrees were new. What's pushing him to do something? The fact that it doesn't say he died and a new king reigned in his stead. The fact that it doesn't do that implies that it is that the last king did not die. Ask the Gemara, so according to the one who says that he made new decrees, it says he did not know Yosef. So if you want to say it's a new king, that makes sense. But if you want to say it's just the same old king, but he changed his rules, what does it mean he didn't know Yosef? So it says, what does it mean he did not know Yosef? He made it seem like he didn't know Yosef at all. In other words, he made these harsh decrees against the Jewish people, despite the incredible history. Right, we've had many rulers who, quote unquote, forget all the good things that were done, and they, so to speak, do not know Yosef. They act as if they did not know Yosef. Okay. Amar Rav Yochanan, Gemara goes back to discussion about the text of our Mishnah. Rav Yochanan says, I spent 18 days with Oshia, Baribi. I only learned one thing from him about our Mishnah, which is when our Mishnah opens up with the word, how do we extend the cities? The Aleph, he says it should be done with an Aleph. That's the only thing he learned. Ask the Gemara, is that really so? Rav Yochanan said, Rav Yoshia Baribi had 12 students, and 18 days I spent among them. Literally, I grew among them. And I learned how clever each one was, how knowledgeable each one was. So how could it be that he learned how clever each student was, how knowledgeable each student was, and yet he didn't learn anything substantive? He only learned the fact that our Mishnah is spelled with an Aleph and not with an Ayin. It doesn't make sense. So two answers. If you want to say, Minayo did hu gamar, he learned from the students a lot. Minay did la gamar. From Oshia Baribi, he did not learn. We'll see why he did not learn from Oshia. He only learned from the students soon. Or you want to say Devar Echab Mishnah Senu Kamar. All means that he learned one thing about a Mishnah, but he learned many Braisas, many Gemaras from Rav Oshia. I was only referring to Mishnayos. Rav Yochanan says, Kshayinu lamdim Torah Eitzal Rav Oshia. When we were learning by Rav Oshia, Yoshrim Arba Ba'ama, we would sit 4 people to an amma. Now, that was not a very large space, but that means they were really crowded. They really wanted to get it all in, and so they stuffed themselves in. They crowded around to catch every word. Amar Rebbe, Kshayinu lomdim Torah Eitzal Rav Elazar ben Shemua, Yoshrim Shisha Ba'ama. When we were by Rav Elazar ben Shemua, we used to sit 6 to an amma. Member of Nachum Lansky, one of the Rebbeim in Eretz Yisrael, has a very soft voice, brilliant, Mekubal and Lamdin, and when he would give a talk in the yeshiva dining room, they had a rotation of Rebbeim, everyone would crowd in, so it's kind of the same thing, you want to grab every word, you don't want to miss anything. Okay, Rav Yochanan says, Rav Oshia Baribi B'doro, Rav Oshia Baribi in his generation, Rabbi Meir B'doro, was like Rav Meir in his generation. What does that mean? Mara Meir B'doro, just like Rav Meir in his generation, so his colleagues were unable to understand the depths of his reasoning. So too with Rav Oshia, his colleagues were unable to fathom the depths of his reasoning. And that perhaps explains why Rav Yochanan says he went and he studied he learned from his students, but he didn't learn from Rav Oshia, because Rav Oshia was too hard to understand. So sometimes you have to go to like the klisheni. You have to go can't go to the source. The source is too difficult, too hot, and so you go to the next source. Sometimes you have these like great Moshe Shapiro, who wrote brilliant and deep Torah. A lot of people have a hard time understanding it. Some of his students wrote some of his Torah, and they kind of they water it down a little bit, and now it's easier to understand. That's the same idea over here. Okay, Rav Yochanan says, Liban Shal Rishon K'Fis Shel Ulam. The minds of the earlier scholars were immense, like the entrance, the hall of the Beis Hamikdash, which is very large. The minds of later scholars were as wide as the entrance, the chamber of the temple itself, the Beis Hamikdash, not the outer area, which is like half that size. Va'anu, meaning it's smaller, they're less expansive, less wise, less knowledgeable. Va'anu kimlo nekev machat tzidkis, like a eye of a needle, which is used to mend tears in clothing. Very, very small. We have very limited knowledge. Okay, Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Kiva, who is the earlier scholars, reference to Rabbi Kiva. He was brilliant, and he was, he was incredibly expansive. Achron Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. The later scholars reference Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. You could Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. There are those who say the earlier generations reference Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. Achron Rabbi Oshia Baribi. The later scholars of Rabbi Oshia Baribi. That's why it's quoted over here. V'anu kimlo nekev makchat sidkis, and we are like the entire eye of a needle used to mend tears in clothing. In other words, our knowledge base, our expansiveness is quite limited. Amar Abaye, and this is the notion of Yeridas Hadoros. This is an idea of Yeridas Hadoros. Amar Abaye v'anan ki siksa begud l'gemara. Abaye says, later generation, he says about himself, he says, like, for us, when we try to learn something, it's like sticking a peg into a narrow hole in a wall. Very hard to push through. Amar Rava takes it a step further. Ki etzbat v'kir l'svara. It's like putting a finger through a hard lump of wax, which, I mean, you can technically do, but it's extremely hard to do. As opposed to the peg, it ultimately pushes through. There's no hole. Amar Vashi, anan, for us, when it comes to forgetting things, ki etzbat v'kir l'shicha, it's like putting a finger into a pit. Like, it's so easy to forget, right? Putting your finger into a pit is quite large, finger is quite small, so it's very easy, and that's exactly the point. We forget things so easily. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. Now we talk about people learning Torah. It says Yehuda, the name of Rav. Bnei Yehuda Sheikbidu L'Shanim, the people of Yehuda who were very particular in the way they spoke. They spoke in a refined fashion. Eskama Torasim B'Yadam, retained their Torah knowledge. Bnei Galil Shelo Ekbidu L'Shanim, the people of Galil who were not particular in the way they spoke. Eskama Torasim B'Yadam, their Torah did not retain their Torah knowledge. Ask the Gemara, Midim Peda Tali Milsa, is knowing Torah dependent on a person's manner of speech? Ella Bnei Yehuda the Daiki L'Shanim, the residents of Yehuda were precise in language, and that spells over to making sure that what they learned is being learned properly. So they assigned symbols to teaching to remember to help with their memory. In other words, they really they dedicated themselves to the language itself, to memorizing what they're learning. Therefore, and therefore the people of Yehuda, of Judea, retained their Torah knowledge. Bnei Galil, the people of Galil who were not precise in their language, they did not assign symbols, they just learned it, but they didn't really push themselves to memorize things. It's so important to review and find ways to review and remember what we're learning. For them, they did not retain Torah knowledge. The residents of Yehuda learned from one teacher, and therefore things were clear, and therefore they retained their knowledge. The people of Galil who learned from a bunch of people, bunch of Rabbeim, and it got confusing, they did not retain their Torah knowledge. The residents of Yehuda, there's different translations, but explanations, but I'm going to say that they taught what they learned. Their Torah knowledge was retained. The best way to know something, I'm telling you, the biggest gift of learning, of teaching, is that you have to know things, to teach it, right? The biggest gift you could do is teach to other people. The people of Galil who did not teach the Talmud that they learned from the they did not retain the Torah knowledge. David taught what he learned is Talmud. Shaul legal masechta, whereas Shaul did not. David who taught, it says, those who fear me, you shall see me, David shall see me and rejoice. Wherever he would turn, he would do wrong. Okay, in other words, he would do wrong, meaning his halachic decisions were wrong because he wasn't clear on things. Because if you never learn to teach, then you don't know things very well. But Rabbi Yochanan says, nonetheless, how do you know Hashem forgave Shaul for the sin? Not this sin, but for the sin that he massacred the people of the priestly city of Nov. Okay, so in Tanakh we find that he went ahead and he killed out the city. And how do we know that? Again, then he did tshuva. How do we know that Hashem forgave him? Because it says the day before he died, Shnemar Machar Ata Uvanecha Imi. Hashem says that Shmuel says to Shmuel, who already died, he's brought up from the dead, so to speak, and he communicates to Shaul, and he says, tomorrow you and your children will be with me. What does it mean with me? Together in my division, together in Gan Eden, together with Hashem, meaning that his tshuva was accepted and he was forgiven for the terrible crime that he committed. Have a wonderful day.